Hello. Oops. Sorry. I'm just trying to start this slideshow here. Hello. It's good to see you all again in this kind of virtual setting. And welcome to our lecture on poetry. I hope you enjoyed this past week looking for contemporary poems in your same theme. I enjoyed reading a lot of them, and I'm giving you feedback on that. I also wanted to mention you might start working on your final project, that is revising your short story and your creative nonfiction piece as we're moving through the poetry unit. Make sure you read all of my feedback on both of those pieces and your peer feedback, because you don't want to save it all till the last minute and then do it really quickly, because you won't do justice to those lovely works that you've created in this class. Okay, so now I really want to talk about poetry, and the essay that I assigned for this week, Mary Ruefle's on beginnings, is a beautiful essay, and I really hope that in your blog post this week you will connect that essay into some of what we're saying here in this lecture, and I hope that you enjoy reading that too. But what I've collected here are some quotes from some different theorists that I enjoy reading, and poets, to talk to you about what poetry is and how to start poetry. I know some of you have had some confusion as we've moved through this, or maybe some ideas about poetry that you had have been changed because you've noticed poetry doesn't have to rhyme or doesn't have to be about a specific elevated subject. It can be about something as simple as a deer, or poetry is a different kind of thing than perhaps a lot of us are used to, even if we've studied it. So I wanted to bring in some quotes that I find particularly useful for getting in a state to write poetry. This one here comes from Richard Hugo's The Triggering Town, which is a phenomenal book about how to kind of find what you want to write about, what triggers you, what inspires you. So his quote says, "Your triggering subjects are those that ignite your need for words." And I don't know about you, but there are instances or moments or objects or people that somehow ignite this kind of fire or passion in me, a need for words. And for me, a lot of times that is mythology. Mythology or literature in general is a really big triggering subject for me. If I'm not finding inspiration, I'll go and read some myths or even fairy tales or things like that. And I often feel this kind of passion stirring up in me that I need to speak my own words. So when you're honest to your feelings, that triggering town chooses you. Your words, used your way, will generate your meanings. So it's not about taking your triggering subject and copying it. It's about finding that passion in you that is triggered by these subjects. So your obsessions lead to your vocabulary, and we'll go into this a little bit more in a second. Your way of writing locates, even creates your inner life. The relation of you to your language gains power. The relation of you to the triggering subject weakens. So eventually you won't need that triggering subject anymore, because you are discovering your own language by using these kind of triggering subjects. So look around you and find something throughout your life which triggers you. You might take a journal with you, and if there is something that ignites that fire in for you for words, just start writing, getting as much on the page as possible so that you come face to face with yourself and your language and the you-ness of it, because that's what poetry is, really. It is not about writing some kind of complicated piece in order to get something correct. It is about embodying the you-ness, about finding your own language in order to express the obsession and passion and core of who you are. So another quote, I don't know if any of you enjoy the poet Adrienne Rich, but she's one of my very favorite writers, and her quote that I chose for this lecture is, "Every poem breaks a silence that had to be overcome." And I really believe this as a poet, that we write poems to overcome silence. We write poems because there's something that we feel that often cannot be put into words, whether it's a pain or a longing or a passion or a joy. These things are so strong often that there is a silence that comes along with them. And so each poem we write is battling with that silence in order to really explain what it is underneath it. The poet Brenda Hillman, who is also a wonderful poet, said, "In poems, the meanings coincide with the rhythms of someone thinking them. They are the subjects of their own making." So the meaning of the poems and the rhythm of the poems go together. So this is a little bit more about the form of the poems themselves, which we'll come to in a minute. I want to go through the Traveling Through the Dark poem, which a lot of you wrote about in your blog posts, and discuss how that poem, even though it's very simplistic in its wording, the rhythm of the thought kind of mirrors the subject too. So be conscious of that as you're writing, that as you're speaking in your own language, finding your own rhythm, that rhythm and language is reflected in your line breaks and things like that. And the last thing I want to talk about is, it goes along with kind of what Mary Ruth is talking about in On Beginnings, but how we begin a poem and beginnings of poems in general. And how we find that language that the Triggering Town and that Adrienne Rich and all of that they're talking about, this kind of voice that you should have. And Catherine Hake is a poet and also a theorist, and she wrote a book called What Our Speech Disrupts. And she talks about the idea of language, of true language. And she bases this on Lacanian language theory. Jacques Lacan was a French psychologist, psychoanalyst who died in the early 1980s, but he's seen to be one of the most important psychoanalysts since Freud. And Freud says a lot on language development and things, but Lacan has a theory about the mirror stage. So in her essay, What Are We to Do with All These Rocks, she explains, and I'll read you this quote and I'll explain it a little bit more. Language is a part of what Lacan calls the symbolic order. And of course, once we've entered it, we cannot know ourselves outside it. We learn to say I, and we become an autonomous self, separate from our mother and from our image in the mirror. We are not what we are once connected to. For the rest of our lives, we will be driven to attempt to recreate the feelings of wholeness, integration, and well-being that existed in the mirror stage. But we will fail because they were imaginary and never existed at all. Illusions of grace. So basically, the Lacan theory is that, I don't know if you've seen a child in a mirror recognize themselves and learn to say I and separate themselves from their mother, that we lose something there because before that, as babies, we're kind of connected to everything in the world. Everything is this kind of imaginary, magical space. No one has put language or rules on us. We're able to just escape it, to clear our minds, to find what we would really speak with, who we can be by taking away that thought. So I really urge you to sit in a quiet place and allow yourself to move away from thinking, to clear thought, so that you can really locate the way your language sounds and the rhythm of your words and your true subjects through this kind of exercise. And that's where I believe most of the time you'll find your subject and your beginning. So coming back to this Traveling Through the Dark, I wanted to kind of connect this poem in. And I want you to pay attention to the way the language works and the line breaks. So line breaks are not just about kind of, prettiness or being there on the end of the page. That is a work of the pacing. So, for instance, if I read the first two lines as if they were one sentence, it would read, "Traveling through the dark, I found a deer dead on the edge of Wilson River Road." That's pretty flat. But do you see the line break? Traveling through the dark, I found a deer dead on the edge of the Wilson River Road. It is usually best to roll them in the canyon. That road is narrow. To swerve might make more dead. By glow of the taillight, I stumbled back of the car and stood by the heap, a doe, a recent killing. She had stiffened already, almost cold. I dragged her off. She was large in the belly. Do you hear the kind of rolling of the language that comes? My fingers touching her side brought me the reason. Her side was warm. Her fawn lay there waiting, alive, still, never to be born. Beside that mountain road, I hesitated. The car aimed ahead its lowered parking lights. Under the hood purred the steady engine. I stood in the glare of the warm exhaust turning red, and I could hear the wilderness listen. Around our group, I could hear the wilderness listen. I thought hard for us all, my only swerving, then pushed her over the edge into the river. So even though, this could feel like a regular story, look how condensed and rhythmic the language is despite the simplicity. And look at how well thought out the line breaks are. So a lot of them are in stop, but even the enjambed ones, by glow of the taillight, I stumbled back of the car and stood by the heap. Just that slight pause there gives us kind of a stumbling. So let your breaks mimic the way that you feel, all the subject that you're writing about. Think about your breaks, about your punctuation, and how that flows with what you're trying to say. Because, I don't want your poems to rhyme, right? Contemporary poetry doesn't rhyme. Stay away from rhyme, because that's something I feel that a lot of us early in education experiment with. Push yourself outside those bounds, but really play with still getting rhythm and sound with the way you break the words, and making that mirror you and your language, your true language, your imaginary space, as much as that's true. So just keep writing and letting that kind of language reflect who you are, so that it kind of becomes this rising insurrectionary thing that's coming out of you, that is important, that is you, because poetry is the best words in the best possible order. But it also is something that is meant to capture the unexplainable in a way that fiction and creative nonfiction cannot. Well, maybe some more lyric creative nonfiction can. But read on beginnings, connect it in your blog, and have a great time with these exercises. I really hope you'll take the time to think about your imaginary space and do away with the language and rules placed on you to speak as you really should, to overcome that silence. So let me know if you have any questions, and talk to you soon.